My name is Şahin. I'm an associate professor of history and the director of the Islamic Studies program here at Indiana University. I would like to welcome you on behalf of the Islamic Studies program, the Cook Center for Public Arts and Humanities, and the Office of the Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion. These three units came together to organize tonight's event, as well as tomorrow morning's poetry reading. You may perhaps wonder why we decided to put together an event on Muhammad Ali. There are a number of reasons. One is personal. After becoming director of Islamic Studies, I wanted to do something about Islam as an integral part of the American religious landscape, rather than a foreign presence or something that is mostly studied by scholars. That's one reason, obviously. Also, recently watching the Ken Burns documentary on Ali, I'm sure some of you saw that. Watching that documentary was also an inspiration about doing something around Ali's life. The documentary itself answers any questions about whether Ali is relevant in the present moment. Ali indeed remains tremendously relevant in any discussion on what it means to be an American and live in America, a land of promise as well as bitter racial and economic inequalities. Why Indiana University? After watching the documentary and having all these thoughts, my partner Rita and I did a little detective work, and we discovered that Ali had been to Bloomington at least 3 times that we could find documents about. Why not bring him back once more? The first time Ali was here was on November 17, 1969. He gave a talk. He discussed his views on the draft, on the Black Muslim movement, as well as boxing. As always, he was very keen on reaching out to the local community. So before coming to Bloomington, he asked his contacts at Indiana University about an action that African-American football players had taken recently. They had quit the IU football team. So he asked to be informed about that so that he could address that in his talk. He returned soon after, in February 1970, this time as part of the Experiencing Blackness Festival. There's a somewhat hostile report of his appearance in the Indiana Daily Student. But even from that report, we find out that he talked about his own faith. He talked about Elijah Muhammad. He talked about, being a black man in America at that particular moment. The festival itself was an interesting activity. It brought to Bloomington prominent figures of the Black Panther Party, as well as the Cannonball Adderley Quintet, who gave a performance the night before Ali's talk. Ali returned a 3rd time in September 2003, this time for the opening ceremonies of the interdenominational temple built by the Tibetan Cultural Center. There's a documentary of the event released by WTIU. It is called Field of Compassion. You can find it online and watch it. While the documentary is about the Dalai Lama, who was also in Bloomington for the same event, Ali completely steals the show. He's always in the frame. The sympathy between him and the Dalai Lama is also very palpable from the screen, right? And of course, the audiences are in love with both of them. So Ali joined the Dalai Lama in helping plant a tree for peace. He also had a speech delivered, read in his name by his daughter, Hana Ali. Unlike his 2 earlier visits, this time Ali was to deliver a message of peace and comity between religions. So we also found it interesting that Ali was in Bloomington in different parts of his life, representing and giving out different messages. Of course, despite the ravages of Parkinson's disease, his humor and wit are also still there. You can see it in the documentary. Also, when he received an official IU sweatshirt from the head of the International Studies program, he grinned and he said, "Is this all I get?" He was a fighter to the very end. A lot of people and campus units came together to make this event possible, and every single person that we contacted enthusiastically offered their help and support, for which I'm very grateful, but this is also a testimony to what Ali represents for all of us. I mean, his name immediately inspires genuine enthusiasm in anybody that we talk to. So some of the supporters of the event are here today. They'll be giving talks. Others generously offered beautiful venues for us to use. They spread the word. They prepared a wonderful poster. Finally, I also want to thank the community that we have at Indiana University, a community that was built over the years through the efforts of hundreds, perhaps thousands of people. We were able to see one more time that we have world-class academic and literary talent here in Bloomington, some of which you will listen to tonight as well as tomorrow morning. There's also this ongoing commitment, despite decreased funding, despite everything else, there's this ongoing commitment to the humanities, represented by our programs and units, and the ability and willingness to bring our different skills together to create something, for which, again, I am very grateful. So let me introduce the speakers. This is a two-part event. We have our panel discussion tonight. Tomorrow morning from 10 a.m. to noon, we will be at the Neil Marshall Black Cultural Center for a poetry reading with Adrian Matika. Tonight, we have a lecture followed by a panel discussion and then closing remarks. So now we will begin with a lecture by Cooper Harris, who has been working on a book about Ali and who's an associate professor of religious studies. The title of Cooper's lecture is Double Cross, Muhammad Ali's Gold Medal and the Irony of American Religion.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaya, for that introduction, and to you and Rita for imagining this and bringing it all to fruition. Also to Linnea for help and tech, and to all the participants and organizations who have made this possible. So my title is over here, Double Cross. It occurred to me, Kaya, and this may become more clear as we move along, but one could build a parallel paper to this one based on just Ali's visits to Bloomington, which might be a fascinating study as well. Double Cross. In February of 1964, on the morning after he defeated Sonny Liston for the World's Heavyweight Boxing Championship, let me make sure I get my timing going. On the morning after he defeated Sonny Liston for the World's Heavyweight Boxing Championship, Cassius Clay confirmed to a room of reporters at a Miami press conference what many suspected and others knew. He was a Muslim, a convert to Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam and confidant of Minister Malcolm X. I believe in Allah and in peace, claimed the boxer who would soon be known as Muhammad Ali. I know the truth. I don't have to be what you want me to be. A major point of grievance for reporters and their readers centered on the Nation of Islam's popular reputation as a racist or anti-American sect. One question concerning Clay's status as, quote, a card-carrying member of the Black Muslims, replete with McCarthyite subtext, prompted the boxer's exasperated response. I am America. I am the part you won't recognize, but get used to me. Black, confident, cocky, my name, not yours. My religion, not yours. My goals, my own. Get used to me. Clay recast the exceptionalist terms of his Americanness through recourse to a newer and truer religio-racial performance, generated, especially as world champion, from a global orientation that stood vigorously at odds with the relative fixity, never mind the whiteness, of the implied conception of America, to which he took exception. And for those who aren't familiar with this term, religio-racial, I use it, it's a way of understanding race and religion as sort of functions of one another. Marking Muhammad Ali's death in 2016, President Barack Obama remixed the boxer's words from 1964 in this way. I'm America, he once declared. That's the Ali I came to know as I came of age, a man who fought for what is right, a man who fought for us. He stood with King and Mandela, stood up when it was hard, spoke out when others wouldn't. His fight outside the ring would cost him his title and his public standing. It would earn him enemies on the left and the right, make him reviled. It would nearly send him to jail. But Ali stood his ground, and his victory helped us get used to the America we recognize today. Obama's framing reflects little of the revolutionary urgency of Clay's 1964 statement. Prophetic knowledge of the truth becomes mere ethics, concerned with what is right, with confirming a reality that has already been fulfilled. Ali resembles King and Mandela, exemplars of historical struggle whose own crimes, imprisonments, and radical politics have been smoothed over and even co-opted. In this way, Obama transforms Clay Ali's claim that I am America from an outrageous and generative speech act that takes exception to US exceptionalism into the retrospective valediction of an exceptionalist fait accompli. Ali's America has become normative, the one that we, and this pronoun sort of groaning with the constitutional burden and significance, we, the people of Obama's office and his occupation of this office as a black man, have gotten used to. Where Ali once challenged America as black and Muslim, Obama tames these identities, marking the boxer as exceptional. Obama's assessment is not unique. Ali found near universal valediction in death as a great, indeed the greatest, of Americans. A former Olympic medalist who became a 3-time professional champion, Ali objectively challenged domestic US racism, championed religious freedom, and served as a cultural and goodwill emissary for US interests abroad. At times, he was likely the most famous man in the world. Popular and academic portraits of the boxer tend to skew uncritical, glossing over more complicated historical aspects of his life and the persona that he carefully crafted and performed over time. Consequently, we often overlook how counterintuitive it proves for a sitting US president to claim that early 21st century America has become most fully to resemble or even to constitute the persona of a black man, a Muslim no less. How could the greatest of Americans possibly bear the name Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, in an age of rampant Islamophobia at home and animosity toward a so-called Muslim world abroad? How might we grapple with the distance between Clay Ali's 1964 statement and Obama's 2016 assessment of Ali and America, even as they deploy the same words to highlight divergent worldviews held in serious tension? Tonight, I want to spotlight Ali's long relationship with US exceptionalism to develop a framework for understanding these distinctions between Ali's prophecy and Obama's sort of management of it. By US exceptionalism, I mean that mode by which US Americans have tended to understand themselves and the nation at large to qualify as chosen, elect, or otherwise set apart, an exception to the rule. John Winthrop's idea of a city upon a hill, appropriated from the Gospel of Matthew, has become a recurrent phrase in the oratory of US presidents throughout the post-war era. This idea of a shining beacon has become a marker of exemplary national virtue, justifying the US's guiding role in God's plan for the world. Scholars and activists have rightly challenged the singularity of this vision in recent decades. Mirroring Ali's challenge, they have asserted and insisted upon the viability of diverse identities and cultural perspectives in order to challenge this exceptionalist status quo. These efforts, however, have been met by the capacity of the exceptionalist myth to manage such diversity, institutionalizing it as a keyword for exemplarity. Racial, ethnic, and religious pluralism have come to reinforce the uniqueness of US institutions, retaining a sense of chosenness by celebrating and indeed sanctifying such diversity. We can hear echoes of this, for example, in Stephen Prothrow's assessment of post-war America as, quote, a moment in American religious life that really is all about pluralism. We just keep extending the sacred canopy over more and more people. Prominent among these people is Muhammad Ali. The emergence of diversity as an exceptionalist principle coincides with Ali's public career, ranging more or less from 1960 through the near present. Indeed, Ali occupies the vanguard of this transformation. In this talk, I want to frame this trajectory in Ali's public persona and also to consider the irony of his post-fighting career, when America did get used to the challenge that young Cassius Clay issued in 1964, not just in the prophetic way that the Miami Statement, which crosses US exceptionalism, suggests. How do we make sense of Ali's acceptance of and by exceptionalism? what we might call this exceptionalist double cross. Tonight, I want to unpack this term and its implications. So, wishing not to overstay my welcome, I want to draw on a single object, a thing, a talisman, to illuminate and untangle the terms of Ali's double cross. So let's look at Muhammad Ali's gold medal. Consider 3 representative moments in time, each documented by an image. In the first, taken during a public moment at the Rome Olympics in 1960, 18-year-old Cassius Clay smiles confidently with his arms around fellow boxers Wilbert McClure and Eddie Cook. They all wear tracksuits emblazoned with the letters USA and proudly emphasize the gold medals that hang from twisted ribbons around their necks. Clay's smile supports David Moranis' depiction of the young boxer as, quote, the gregarious clown prince of the Olympic Village, Uncle Sam's unofficial goodwill ambassador. At the heart of his persona resides what one journalist called a solid Americanism. To a question that from a foreign reporter about intolerance in your country, for instance, Clay responded, "Oh yeah, well, we got some problems, but let's get this straight, it's still the best country in the world." Ali would later characterize his Olympic success as a Cold War victory, telling the BBC's Michael Parkinson in 1971 that winning gold over second and third place finishers from the Soviet Union and Poland meant defeating America's threats and enemies. A poem he composed specifically for his 1960 homecoming back to Louisville claims, "To make America the greatest was my goal, so I beat the Russian and I beat the Pole, and for the USA won the Medal of Gold." Ali's biographer, Jonathan Eig, notes that with political tensions high, it was impossible to watch the Rome Olympics without considering the potentially apocalyptic struggle around the globe. In Rome, Ali became a cold warrior, fighting for his country. In this context, the gold medal marks him as a living emblem of US exceptionalism. The medal's significance to Clay manifests in the pride he took in having won it. Sources claim that he wore it everywhere he went, refusing to take it off even at bedtime. It seems clear, too, that Ali understood the medal, for a time at least, potentially to offer a mode of protection against the violence and exclusion of Jim Crow racism. Upon his return from Rome, Clay was feted by Louisville, his hometown. Proudly donning his medal, he rode in a motorcade from the airport to his old high school, where dignitaries saluted him as a fine ambassador, essentially a credit to his race. In such a context, it makes sense that Clay, still a teenager and the product of a racially segregated community, would associate his medal with potential inclusion in the whiteness of the exceptionalist myth. A resilient legend holds that following this homecoming celebration in Louisville, Clay attempted to eat at a whites-only restaurant in downtown Louisville. He was denied service and, in a moment of hurt and frustration, or so the story goes, retreated to the nearby banks of the Ohio River, where he cast his medal, this emblem of his exceptional Americanness, into the waters of the historical dividing line between North and South in the United States. The story is almost certainly not true. In another sense, though, it proves too true, more true than any factual account could muster. The outward sign of his exceptionalism did not work, so he surrendered it to this fluid border, this historically and politically fraught space in between. Our second image, this one from the 1960s, rejects the conditions and context of the first. It shows Muhammad Ali in full Fruit of Islam regalia, standing on a dais as he gestures to the crowd and speaks in what appears to be an impassioned tone. Though the dais replicates the scene of his medal ceremony in Rome, there is no medal in this photo. On his lapel, Ali wears a shiny pin. The forearms of his sleeves carry insignia suggestive of military rank. On his hat, we do see 3 letters, though USA, the USA of his Rome tracksuit, has been replaced by FOI, standing for Fruit of Islam. His religio-racial identity as a member of the Nation of Islam removes the word marks, the decorations of the exceptionalist Olympic costume. It removes the medal, Here, he takes exception, we might say, to the terms of his previously exceptional public posture. This symbolic rejection of U.S. exceptionalism sets in play the decisive action of 1966 and 67 when he refused military induction as a minister of Islam. Ali's famous justification, "I ain't got no quarrel with the Viet Cong," diagnoses with breathtaking economy the U.S. war effort abroad as roughly indistinguishable from, indeed of a piece with, the U.S. Legacy of racist management of black citizens at home. The statement offers an elegant vernacular shorthand for the hypocrisy of an allegedly freedom-loving people who perpetuate that freedom at the expense of the liberties, livelihoods, and bodies of others, their own fellow citizens and the people of foreign states, through government organizations and military agencies wielded as global enforcers of the status quo. Such a view coheres well with the Nation of Islam's critique of America, more broadly, and the assumptions of U.S. exceptionalism in particular, taking exception, we might say, to such exceptionalism. Ali the medalist now crosses as a medalist with no medal, an aspect that differs significantly from simply possessing no medal. A third image depicts Muhammad Ali in Atlanta among the 1996 U.S. Olympic men's basketball team, Dream Team 2, flanked by Charles Barkley, Karl Malone, Scottie Pippen, among others. The retired champ wears a red knit shirt that carries over his right breast, the U.S. Olympic shield, featuring prominently the letters USA. The players who have draped their arms around him wear a stylized USA on their warm-up shirts, calling back to the earlier image of Cassius Clay with fellow Olympians McClure and Cook in 1960. Hanging from Ali's neck is an Olympic gold medal, a new one, commissioned especially by the U.S. Olympic Committee to replace the lost or discarded original medal. This new medal honored Ali's symbolic return to the fold, dramatically ritualized by his climactic role as surprise cauldron lighter. I've often said torch lighter, but I think he used the torch to light the cauldron, but the cauldron looks like a torch. Go figure. I will use these words interchangeably. So this climactic role, this surprise lighting of the thing. In this way, reapplying the USA letters in the place of the FOI, returning to the Olympic dais and once again wearing the medal that first marked his exceptionalism, Ali comes home. Matter is put back in place. Ali reigns as the greatest American, his new medal serving as an exceptionalist shield. Critically, though, this is no first-order replication of the earlier photo. The figure on stage, the man with the medal and the USA shirt, these are not the same person who fulfilled many of these functions in Rome in 1960. Instead, Ali in Atlanta in 1996 represents an exceptional American who, having taken exception, now finds himself all the more exceptional for having done so. Whereas mid-60s Ali derives his public persona by protesting as a medalist without a medal, by the 1990s, Ali becomes a medalist without a medal who wears a medal. To paraphrase Wendy Doniger in Atlanta, Ali effectively pretended to be who he was. How can we make political sense of the irony in play here and its negotiation of Ali's relationship with U.S. exceptionalism? I want to argue that it represents a double cross. The double cross that I invoke here blends elements of stagecraft, performance, and boxing etymology to lay bare the sense of play so inherent to Ali's long public career and his status as an American religious figure. He dwells in contradiction, a fighter who wouldn't fight. He floats like a butterfly, he stings like a bee. He is at once his own version of America and an exemplar of the America that Obama inscribes upon him. Kierkegaard calls irony the reflection of a reflection, and this continually recursive quality fits well within such a mirrored vision. This is not to diminish Ali's prophetic qualities, but rather to point out how easily they have been secularized by calling them good. The exceptional American's first disobedience against this America becomes transformed into an act of conscience that rationalizes his later rehabilitation. cross and double cross. Focusing on the exceptionalist double cross matters for other reasons. It focuses attention beyond the 1960s and 70s, pointing to later periods of Ali persona. Eig's major biography, this biography was published in 2017, a biography of Ali, sees Ali retire on page 498 and die 35 years later on page 534. He retires in 1981, so this is 35 years. These years that fall between, in particular, are the years of the double cross. Details from this time challenge a simple valorization of the boxer by highlighting the contradictions he held in tension as he continued to negotiate terms by which he could be America. He flummoxed his expectation. In some less flattering instances, we find reminders to weigh critically the terms by which this later Ali is honored. Racial authenticity and religious freedom both prove difficult to parse, and we disserve both by secularizing them in the way that Obama does and so many others have. Thinking with the double cross maintains a recognition of Ali's outlandishness in the face of management and standardization. And it remains true as well that such outlandishness is not always as we might have it. Ali's double cross emerges from the end of a number of important chapters in his life. In 1974, he regained the title that was stripped from him 7 years earlier. Months later, the death of Elijah Muhammad fractured the Nation of Islam and put in motion Ali's move to Sunni Islam. The US State Department deployed him as an emissary to Africa in 1980. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's syndrome in 1984, the same year he endorsed Ronald Reagan for president. Ali negotiated with Saddam Hussein for the release of 15 hostages on the eve of the First Gulf War in 1990. This period culminates, the period I want to think about, with Ali's dramatic role as the torch cauldron lighter in the opening ceremonies of the 1996 Olympics, an event that also showcased his escalating disability. Stopping here, near the end of the 20th century, we do not finish Ali's life. We don't quite make it to the scene of Obama's eulogy or the memorial services. Other complications enter the fray, including September 11th, and Ali's more profound physical decline. Nevertheless, what this mid-1970s to mid-1990s period reflects is the long development of the double cross, as Muhammad Ali, that fighter who wouldn't fight, becomes a stalwart patriot, exceptional American, an agent of the state he once defied. Consider Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, in which Viola, a woman character, pretends to be a man. Such a depiction crosses on a surface level, reading woman to man, resonant with concepts such as cross-dressing and the like. Conventions of stagecraft at the turn of the 17th century, however, dictated that male actors play female roles, an element of the play that Shakespeare clearly writes to embellish in Twelfth Night. In this way, Viola, in performance, carries a legacy of double crossing. Her stage persona as woman pretending to be a man registers as man performing as a woman who is pretending to be a man. Akin to the grammatical double negative, performing Viola's crossing in this way differs from a male actor simply depicting a man on stage, much in the way that not being not excited is not the same thing as being excited. A performative difference belies the arithmetic logic that renders them equivalent. In addition to its performative dimensions, the double cross derives etymologically from the history of boxing. In one sense, it refers to a deceptive second punch delivered with the same hand rather than a more powerful shot that the other hand could produce, that throws an opponent off balance. What this double punch, this double cross, lacks in power, it makes up for in surprise. The OED traces the double cross back to an 1848 Sporting Life article that details suspicion of a double cross, leading to the suspension of all gambling activity on a certain match. A fighter who accepted a bribe to take a dive, losing on purpose, then elected to go ahead and just win the fight, collecting both the bribe and the prize money, and double crossing his criminal benefactors. In this way, we can understand that a double cross deals in instability and perhaps even, and deception, in someone not being who others think he is, not doing what others presume he will do. For our present context, then, an exceptionalist double cross hinges on the uncertainty at play in Ali's relationship to U.S. exceptionalism, a kind of double dipping derived from his rejection of U.S. foreign and domestic agendas in the 1960s, only to have this rejection transformed into an act of conscience that in turn renders him a mascot for these same agendas he once challenged. Here are the terms of Ali's later American persona according to the exceptionalist double cross. He is one, the exceptional American who, two, takes exception to U.S. exceptionalism, only three, to become all the more exceptional in the process. David Quint describes Virgil's, what he calls Virgil's poetic double cross in the Aeneid in this helpful way. It sets up a binary opposition only to break it down. It assigns one value to one side of an opposition, only to load it with the value to which it had been initially opposed. The effect is irony, paradox, or the peculiar sense of saying two things at once, sometimes overtly, sometimes surreptitiously. This idea of an instability in values, the act of playing both sides, proves especially germane for Ali's exceptionalist double cross, evocatively depicted in the Atlanta photo where Ali represents the medalist without a medal who wears a medal. So I want to look at a couple of other case studies here. There are going to be 4 of them. And So the first one I call boycotting Moscow. In early 1980, US President Jimmy Carter enlisted Ali to court support among select African nations, Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, Liberia, and Senegal, on behalf of a threatened boycott of the upcoming Moscow Olympics. The boycott ostensibly protested the Soviet Union's recent invasion of Afghanistan, though it also illuminated simmering Cold War tensions between the US and USSR. That Ali would prove attractive for such a mission should come as little surprise. A world traveler since Rome 2 decades earlier, Ali enamored audiences wherever he went, including fight locales such as Kinshasa and Manila. Diplomacy appealed to Ali as well, leading him to tout his potential, I love this, to tout his potential as, quote, the Black Henry Kissinger. Ali's religious, racial, and cosmopolitan significance made him an ideal candidate to promote US interests to African leaders in response to the invasion of a majority Muslim country by a common foe. Things in Africa did not go according to plan. Trouble struck on the first stop of what the State Department called a goodwill tour, when Tanzanian President Julius Nyerere, unimpressed by what he deemed Ali's ignorance of US and Western policies toward the continent, including South African apartheid, claimed he was too busy to meet with Ali. Tanzanian journalists in turn called Ali an Uncle Tom, leaping to do his government's bidding, charges that caught Ali off guard and unprepared to rebut with any specificity. Embarrassed, the boxer was overheard complaining that he had been sent by Carter to be America's whipping boy, an admission that further weakened his agenda. By his next stop in Kenya, however, the reception proved friendlier and Ali was back on message. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance called Ali an effective and eloquent spokesman, though an unnamed official called him an unguided missile. There's no recovery, but now he's back on course. Ali's tour obviously sought to capitalize on his notoriety in the developing world, and Carter was willing to risk a measure of unpredictability if it allowed him to harness this celebrity to advance his own political objectives through the African initiative. However we may interpret the breakdown in Tanzania, Ali's function as an agent of the State Department becomes clear in its eventual resolution. Ali is deployed precisely because he is Black and Muslim, yet he performs these identities at the pleasure of the state. Reined in, on message, however Black, however Muslim, these ideas feed his Americanness. Example 2, voting for the man. In the lead up to the 1984 presidential election, a billboard appeared in majority black neighborhoods featuring President Ronald Reagan with the boxers Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, and Floyd Patterson. Reagan playfully punches a smiling Ali on the chin as the words, "We're voting for the man," emblazon the top of the image. Ali endorsed Reagan's re-election in early October of 1984 at a small Los Angeles gathering for black Republicans. Old allies were flabbergasted. Jesse Jackson, whose candidacy Ali endorsed in the Democratic primaries that year, called him punch drunk, which, given that he had just been diagnosed with Parkinson syndrome, which is the result of being hit in the head repeatedly for years, who knows? Andrew Young, then mayor of Atlanta, beseeched Ali in person to reconsider. Leah Wright Rigueur acknowledges that this episode does not fit with our memories of Ali. For her, it reflects the complexity of his persona. In fact, this was not Reagan and Ali's first encounter. In 1970, Reagan, then governor of California, dismissed the possibility of licensing Ali's comeback fight, claiming that draft dodger will never fight in my state. 14 years later, Ali lauded Reagan's policies pitched towards religious freedom, including school prayer initiatives. In this way, the draft dodger who avoided conscription on religious grounds finds something relatable in the religious articulation of Reagan's exceptionalism. Even more jarring for those who had followed Ali's career is his appearance on the sign with Patterson and Frazier, two of the boxers he most relentlessly mocked as Uncle Toms in the 1960s and 70s. Much like the Tanzanian journalist's claim about Ali's cooperation with the US State Department, Ali found his strident image called into question. The old Ali called others Uncle Tom. Now he shared political space with them. The sign's slogan also raises eyebrows. "We're voting for the man," it claims, with emphasis on the man, that vernacular paragon of cultural whiteness and hegemonic power. Number 3, courting Saddam. In 1990, following Iraq's invasion of oil-rich Kuwait, and some 6 weeks before the beginning of Operation Desert Storm, Ali traveled to Baghdad, hoping to negotiate with Saddam Hussein for the release of 15 US hostages, held as human shields. As far as we know, Ali traveled as a private citizen and not as an agent of the US government, though this mission was spearheaded by former US Attorney General Ramsey Clark. The George H.W. Bush administration opposed the mission, or at least did so on the record, and such opposition seems likely given the risk that friendly association with Ali, who was popular globally among Muslims, paired with the possibility of a magnanimous gesture from Saddam, risked painting the Iraqi leader in a positive light on the global stage. Classified documents may yet tell another story. Nevertheless, reading this episode through a lens afforded by the exceptionalist double cross emphasizes Ali's role as an American Muslim emissary. In this light, he proves exceptional rather than exception taker. Furthermore, engaging this intervention with continual reference to Ali's exception taking in the 1960s highlights parallels between wars fought to manage political resources, yet framed by humanitarian rationales. In this latter-day instance, Ali inserts himself, albeit in an extra-official capacity, by electing to serve as an act of resistance to the US government, rather than resisting compulsory service, as he had 25 years before. He intervenes through diplomacy, relying upon his charisma and celebrity, not to strike against a foreign enemy, but to liberate his fellow Americans, a motley crew consisting of an incredibly Ali-esque combination of mercenaries and humanitarians. Here, his sense of Americanness filters through a Muslim identity that mitigates Islamic outsiderness, especially its global exception taking against the great Satan that is the US, through his double cross as exceptional American, derived from his own exception taking as an exercise of religious freedom and an act of conscience. The range of contradictions in this example prove dazzling. Carrying a torch, and that is a torch. I know that. Finally, we consider Ali's surprise appearance at the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, where he appeared on stage to light with the Olympic torch, the Olympic cauldron, an honorary distinction that marked him as the greatest of American athletes. I described something of what it may have been like to watch the event in person. 80,000 people crammed in a stadium in Atlanta. Around the world, hundreds of millions watched on television. Evander Holyfield carried the torch into the stadium and handed it to Janet Evans, the gold medal winning swimmer, who carried it up a long ramp. Evans was supposed to hand the torch to its final carrier, who would light the Olympic cauldron and signal the official start of the Games. There was no one in sight. Then, from the shadows, came a large, slow-moving figure, an apparition dressed all in white. A roar shot through the stadium. It began with a whoa and suddenly turned into a thrilled, throaty, rattling cheer. They chanted, Ali, Ali, Ali. The ceremony not only showcased Ali, his reputation now fully transformed into an emblem of U.S. exceptionalism, but it also spotlighted his physical condition. Now, more than a decade beyond his diagnosis with Parkinson's syndrome, his hands trembled on the dais. They trembled holding the torch. Watching video of it now, I didn't think we would have time to watch it, but I encourage you to watch it later. For an uncertain moment, and this happens to me still, no matter how many times I watch it, it seems like maybe he won't get it lit. It's a heart-pounding situation. He may have trouble lighting the mechanism. Ali's physical condition warrants mention because more broadly, it introduces yet another crossing element for Ali's persona in this later period. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's syndrome in 1984, a condition that attacked those very important elements that made Ali, Ali. His incredible strength, his grace and agility, floating like a butterfly. His facial animation and relentless speech filled with mean mugs, poetry, and shit talk. These aspects, what made him famous and dangerous, beloved and reviled, were precisely what his illness attacked and compromised. To witness Ali at the Atlanta Olympics is, in a way, to see someone else, a slower, more languid and taciturn presence whose affect becomes all the more resonant or meaningful for the way it crosses the brash and gorgeous Louisville lip of the early 1960s. Consider these divergent takes derived from Ali's later period. On the one hand, concerning the Atlanta Olympics, Ig writes, the crowd cheered because they saw Ali as a rebel again. They saw a man who wasn't afraid to show his weakness, a man whose shaking hands reminded everyone of what he said countless times when he was young and vital and seemingly immortal, that he had no fear of death. For Ig, this Ali proves familiar. Words like again, reminded, highlight the kind of return invoked by this ritual. On the other hand, paraphrasing Michael Ezra's account of this general period, Reagan writes, Ali gained currency in this time as a safe pop cultural figure at a moment when he was clearly not able to express himself forcefully, as he once did, when he was no longer a member of the Nation of Islam and no longer posed the threat that he did during the 1960s. Reagan's Ali bears little resemblance to the original that Ig understands him to point back to. He is no longer what he was, not able, and thus disabled by Parkinson's. I cite these examples not to side with either position, one position or the other, but in fact to posit them both as true, as recursively reinforcing a contingent veracity, one for another, about Muhammad Ali. Here we see the double cross at play in the contradictions that multiply over time. They remain in tension. Ali is never singular, never either or. He always signifies the both and, a plenitude and even an excess of meaning, the mask and the masked. So in the minute and a half I have left, I want to sketch, and this is very, very preliminary and suggestive, because we're about to have a really great discussion, and I think many of these topics might get taken up there. But I want to sketch some ways that the double cross can help us consider Ali in a way that opens up the fullness of his complicated reality as an American Muslim of global significance. The first considers religious freedom, which I think will be a topic shortly. Many would understand the religious freedom that made Ali a conscientious objector in the 1960s, not to align necessarily with the religious freedom created by or cited by the Reagan administration to justify school prayer in the 1980s, and yet both function under the same moniker and appeal to the same sensibility, that the US government shall not prohibit the free exercise of religion. There's room for debate here, but both freedoms can be said to hinge legally on the sincerity of belief that drives them. On this understanding, religious freedom becomes a more complicated aspect of Ali's career than its usually characterization. Similarly, the sincerity at the heart of Ali's conscientious objection often bleeds over into this reception and characterization of his broader political agendas. The man's humanitarian legacy derives from a well of sincere compassion and devotion to principles such as his much-quoted aphorism that service to others is the rent you pay for your room on earth. And yet, Ali was an inveterate bullshitter who modeled his persona on the kayfabe, or the put-on of professional wrestling, whose performance on The Tonight Show in 1963, accompanied by Liberace no less, rhymes money with total eclipse of the sunny. The double cross provides a venue not for reconciliation of these sincere tensions of sincerity, but for a refusal to diminish one for the other. And finally, we might consider Ali as a Muslim and point to the problem of defining the relative orthodoxy of religious identity. Ali's sincere belief was informed by a group that other Muslims have considered apostate. At the same time, he spearheaded the Americanization of Sunni immigrants in Michigan, creating in the process new modes of American Islam and making Islam into American religion. Just after 9/11, he sought to quell violence against Muslims in the US by arguing that the perpetrators were not real Muslims. And then there are the memorial services, as we shall hear. As with sincerity, we do well to hold these desires for definition, for distinguishing good religion from bad belief at arm's distance. The double cross refuses to limit or secularize Ali. It aims specifically not to reduce his legacy and actions to mere ethics, to doing what was right. It avoids the temptation to make him, or ideally it avoids the temptation to make him into what we want him to be, and opens a more full and recalcitrant reality of Ali's ironic dimensions as a voice without restraint. At the same time, it permits Ali to be Ali, a compelling and complicated figure whose ambiguities, like the Ohio River, generate an iconic flow.
Thank you so much, Cooper. I'm sure I'm not the only person looking forward to the publication of the book. So now we have a discussion. First, we have Walter Muyumba, Associate Professor of English, and then Wilfred Sullivan, Professor of Religious Studies. They will offer their comments on the basis of Cooper's lecture. If you don't mind, could you please come up here? Do you prefer to be seated, or you can take the podium? You just have to come into the microphone so that
Good evening. How's everyone? Maybe I'll unmask too. I decided to come and listen and riff Ali style, improvise a little bit, to think about the way that Ali's Midwesternness may be part of his global power. Rather than being from the West with its particular mythologies, or the East with the kind of original American narrative, the Midwest is a place of both I think, improvisational ingenuity. And one can go and find Ali the poet online in various places to hear how his sense of language and play and musicality allowed him to play at the multiplicities that we just have been learning about. I want to claim in part that that multiplicity is a product of being from this region, in fact. Not only Louisville, not only Michigan, but also Chicago, where Ali spent a significant time period, especially during the 1960s, when he was languishing as not only a medalist without a medal, but a champion without a belt. So part of that, the kind of Midwestern ethic I want to touch on around Ali is an ability to mask as Southern, mask as Midwesterner, mask as exceptional American. There's something about being from the middle of things, which one might call a kind of liminality, where you can play at these various possibilities of identification that I think is really crucial to Ali's identity. Part of my thinking on this is personal. So let me just tell a little bit of a background story. I was born here in Bloomington. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing, nearly 50 years ago, come June. Let's say it's a good thing. 50 is a good round number. I hope this is going to be a new good decade. What's that? Oh, okay. I'll take that. Thank you. I'm only masking at that, by the way. I'm playing at that. But I was born here because my father, who was a PhD student in linguistics and education, and my mother, who I think had just started her undergraduate degree, had immigrated from Congo, Kinshasa, to the United States. My father first in the early 1960s as a student, even before the 1964 Immigration and Naturalization Act. He came by way of the Presbyterian Church, studied at a small liberal arts college, Davis and Elkins in West Virginia, did a master's degree at Portland State before arriving in Bloomington, following the leadership of his mentor, Professor Walton Manning, exactly the person where I get my name from. My mother arrived in 1971, much younger than my father, about a decade younger. They were married at a small ceremony here in Bloomington. And part of what my father was trying to, I think, achieve through his study, and what he'd actually already begun in some of his return trips to Congo, was create a conduit for Congolese students and African students generally to migrate and study in the US and maybe go back home. So imagine in the midst of the burgeoning post-colonial era on the African continent, my father was among those students who were coming to the United States to prepare themselves to return back to the continent and become leaders in these burgeoning nation states. Flash forward just 2 years, I cannot remember this event myself, and I'm pretty sure, given that I was my parents' firstborn child, that they would not have let their 2-year-old stay up in a party circumstance. But in 1974, along with several other African students here in Bloomington, my parents threw a party or participated in a party where they watched Ali's fight in Kinshasa against George Foreman. And that evening became part of the lore of my family's becoming. This is the year before my younger brother was born. But I learned very quickly that Ali represented something not only to African America, but to Africans in America, who were also imagining what being back home might mean. The fight was, I think, especially important for my parents, who were imagining that this might be the beginning of then Zaire becoming something like a legitimate nation state. That didn't play out. And instead, what played out is that my parents hoped that their sons, myself, my two younger brothers, and then their daughter, my sister, would become emblematic of a kind of prize-fighting ethic, if you will, here in the United States. That is to say that you can simultaneously be American and Black and Congolese and global and never reduce yourself to the limitations that either the popular culture or political circumstance might enclose you within. And so I became cognizant of Ali as a conceptual, iconic figure well before I understood anything about boxing. And by the time I became interested in boxing, it was the end of Ali's career, but I do recall, even in the latter stages, making an effort to turn on, some of you may recall ABC Wide World of Sports, in the hopes on a Saturday afternoon to catch Ali in conversation with Howard Cosell, where I would understand this later as a high schooler, to watch a Jewish American and an African American Muslim spar through insults as a kind of ethnic possibility of Americanness that I couldn't see otherwise. The other thing to think about, and I love the image that we just saw of the second iteration of the Dream Team encircling Ali. Among the key figures from my sports background and history, who also gave me another way of imagining myself, you can barely see him ducking into the image next to Ali, is Akeem Olajuwon, who I started paying attention to when I was 10 years old because of Phi Sigma Gamma, University of Houston, and Olajuwon, which doesn't necessarily sound a lot like Muyumba, but is clearly an African name. People were forced to learn how to speak that name and understand who Olajuwon was, especially when he changed his name from Akeem to Akeem with an H and pronounced himself a Muslim. In part, that was part of his effort of naturalization, a process that my own parents were going through at that same time. But another key figure, and the reason we can see him in this shot, is that in 1994 or 5, he himself had become an American citizen. So noticing that when the picture appears also helps me think about this conceptualization of the African in America in the Midwest who is able to be multiple things at once. I'll pause there and listen to Winnie and we can start to.
So thank you all for coming on this wet evening, and thank you, Kaya, for organizing this. That was dazzling, both of you. So I'm a lawyer, and I study religion. I'm not a specialist in the life of Muhammad Ali. But into 2016, I live in Chicago. I was driving between Chicago and Bloomington during that memorial service, and I heard the whole thing, and it was one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. And I really urge all of you to do that. It was as if time stopped, and as you've heard, and maybe some of you know, he had that capacity to just stop us and teach us, and that's what I learned in that time, something about religious freedom, which is something I've studied for my career. And I've been mostly interested, like many lawyers, many academics, and I've written about how courts deal with religion and religious freedom. And it's tempting to think that it's judges who are in charge of what religious freedom means, even what being an American means, even what being human means. We've handed that over to the judges and lawyers. But recently I've begun to be more interested in the ways in which people other than judges and lawyers have imagined and lived religious freedom, often without recourse to the law in any formal way, often in defiance of the law. And this is true everywhere, but we have a particular version of it in the US. I think hearing about Ali, being instructed by Ali during that 3-hour memorial service returns us to the basics of American government and reminds us that it is indeed we, the people, who are sovereign, and it is the court of public opinion, if you like, that matters, more perhaps than the Supreme Court. Not that the court of public opinion always gets it right. As far as the First Amendment to the US Constitution and the religion clauses, everyone agrees that the Supreme Court's religion cases are among their most incoherent. And this has been true since the 1950s. This is not new. It may feel new to you, but it is not a recent phenomenon. The religion cases have always been some of the most divisive cases considered by the court, and they have seemed incapable of imagining what American religion is. So, as you know from civics class, our Constitution frames a government of enumerated powers shared between the federal and the state governments, enumerated powers granted to them by we the people. And this makes a contrast with European welfare states who enjoy the plenary power that their predecessor kings enjoyed, church and state together over the people. In the US, as I say, it is we the people who govern both. Interpreting the Constitution is not just the preserve of the Supreme Court. It is also for the people, sometimes called popular constitutionalism. So in this time when the reputation of the Supreme Court is rapidly diminishing and much, much diminished from when I was in law school in the 1970s, and we revered them as the heroes who decided Brown versus Board of Education, among other great cases. But the Supreme Court has not done a really good job for us recently. And if we look at the religion cases, the Supreme Court this week has just taken a case to consider whether a web designer can refuse to serve a gay client on the ground that their religious freedom forbids it. So whatever position you take in this case, I would argue that we see very cramped ideas about religion evident in this debate on both sides. On both sides. It's a very limited vision of religion and religious freedom. So I invite you to consider instead to listen, to learn from Muhammad Ali in his memorial service, teaching us what religious freedom is. And again, it's 3 hours long. A cast of many: Willie Nelson, several pastors, a Catholic Monsignor, 3 Native American religious leaders, Bill Clinton, Orrin Hatch, a couple of imams. It goes on. It's quite remarkable. It's like, here is America presented to you by Muhammad Ali. And it would be easy, too easy to say, as Cooper was saying, that this is a celebration of something simple, of just multiplicity, diversity. That is not what's happening there. And there's something about, well, popular constitutionalism generally, but very particularly in the case of Muhammad Ali as our teacher about the Constitution here, that asks us to consider a reinvention of America and pins us to the ground, really, while he teaches us what the Constitution could mean, what America could mean. And as the camera pans over these little girls in the front row, all dressed in their best and clearly have been told by their mama not to move, and you think, oh my God, how are they going to do this, these 2 little girls, for this whole service? And they're just there looking so perfect. I urge you to watch it with the words of both Cooper and Walton in mind, and to learn from Muhammad Ali. That's all I'll say, so thank you.
Thank you so much. I mean, you may stay, but then Lem is going to deliver some closing remarks, and then we will all come back up here for the Q&A. Thank you so much. Walton, your remarks reminded me of one of my earliest childhood memories, which is of my father and his friends getting up, at 4 a.m. or something to watch, Ali fight. And in my mind, he was the first Muslim that I had ever heard of living in the West. So it's like a mythical presence. I mean, it's just, I didn't even know that, I remembered all that, but just what you said kind of brought it back to me. I mean, it really is amazing how he could appeal to, that kind of a very wide audience. Anyway, but now for the closing remarks of the night, we have Lemuel Watson, who is a professor of education as well as of African American and African diaspora studies, and then we have our Q&A. Thank you.
Good evening. I really enjoyed this talk. I love being here at Bloomington because from one evening to the other is so exciting. I was at a talk last night dealing with African American and Jewish relations during the civil rights movement, pre and post, and tonight I'm at this wonderful event about Ali, blacks and Muslims. And so I want to thank Dr. Cooper for a wonderful paper tonight and presentation, and the 2 panelists as well. And what I would like to just draw your attention to are a couple of things here. I am American. It wasn't by chance that he just said that. He was letting people know, without a doubt, I am American. Get used to me was purposeful, because what it says is, I belong at this table. I am a part of this family, and you will deal with me. The other statement that I love was, I don't have to be what you want me to be. And I think that is a powerful statement as well for any of us and very relevant today. A man who fought for what is right. And that is extremely important in today's context. Do we have the courage to stand up for what is right? Do we know our purpose and our purpose as a nation? And do we have the passion with the peace to stand in the ground and on the ground and with people who disagree with us to have dialogue and faith that we can come to conclusions? Ali was a hero and a challenge and so much for his time. He did not want to fight in the Vietnam War. And so he refused to go kill black and brown people in the name of a country that had issues that enslaved black and brown people. And he was public with that. So how do we create the space and community where we respect our differences, have dialogue around our uniqueness, and recognize the diversity in all? How do we create the dignity of practice in our daily lives, in our families, in our work, and in our communities? Intersectionality is what the panelists talked about as well. You know, how can we understand in America and get rid of the boxes that have limited us in so many ways? How do we deal with the notion of race nowadays? We know that it's a social construct. How do we deal with religion, though, especially within public spaces and public institutions? How do we recognize that religion is just as much cultural and part of diversity as anything else, and to leave it on the shoulders of the sidewalk as we come into public spaces also denies us part of who we are? So how do we choose? I would say, in listening to Dr. Harris talk about this, is that Ali educated himself, and something that we all need to be about as we become a global society. I think he educated himself from where he was from in Kentucky to where he wanted to go in order to choose the kind of spiritual journey he wanted to have. And I think in doing so, he understood the notion of double cross. And by the way, I love that. I love the notion of double cross, deceit. When we think of our Christian and all of our top religion, we have to also bring into question, how are we deceived with all of it? We have to understand that part of the double cross is hybrids of seeds. It's also a process in which seeds get hybrid with one another. So this also notion of double cross brings me up in remembering W.E.B. Du Bois with his notion that in America, if you're black or brown, you have to deal with the double consciousness of being American, but also something else. But then, as I listened to Cooper talk about the double consciousness or double cross, I thought about this in real terms with the burden of having to carry two crosses, like Christ, our way shower, a prophet, told us. As an example, you have one of the America and trying to live up to those justices, but also one of something that's very personal. And so we're wrestling with this today with individual freedoms versus group freedom. So the question for me through all of this is, where in our contracts with ourselves are we deceiving ourselves and others, and are we still being double-crossed with our perspective. As Ali traveled around the world, I think he called to the attention of most countries to pay attention to what the USA, United States of America, was doing. And he called to the attention a lot of accountability. For example, as he traveled around the world during the 60s and afterward, I think he shouted in many ways, in a real silent way, look at the US, look at those freedoms at work. Look at liberty for all at work. Look at one nation under God at work. Look at all men are created equal at work. And look at what Christian love looks like in America at work. And that, to me, looks deceitful, and it was deceitful. And it called to the attention of nations the hypocrisy of America. But more importantly, it called the attention to what does democracy look like? And is this truly democracy? Is America just an illusion regarding democracy and our Constitution? Again, who is double-crossed? How will we go forward as a society in the U.S. in this experiment of joining together as a country? I have to tell people in my work that we are still very much a young country as it relates to integration in the workplace. But I thank Ali, and I thank the panelists and Dr. Cooper for bringing one thing to my attention tonight, that 50 years ago, I would not have been able to say in a truly way. But before I do that, I just want to say and shout out to my grandmother who is deceased. She loved Ali. She thought he was the most beautiful man in the world. And she loved the fact that he always said, I'm an American, before anything else. And so I just want to leave you with this thought. You can be American with Southern roots, be a Christ follower who embraces Buddhist principles, who is African, who is Scot-Irish, who is gay, presents as cisgender, who identifies as African American in this country. To identify yourself that way, years ago, people would have looked at you very strangely. But we have that freedom now to identify ourselves and to ask people to get used to it. And so I just want to remind all of you, as I close here, as Ali probably would have thought, you can't do all the good the world needs, but the world needs all the good that you can do where you are, with whom you're around. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now the floor is open to questions. Could you please come up here, if it's okay with you? So we will have a podium, so if you have a question, you can come to the microphone and ask your question. Because we are broadcasting this live, you have to speak into the microphone, otherwise you could obviously stay wherever you are and ask your question, but in order for the broadcast to pick up your voice, you need to use the microphone. So, any questions, any comments? Obviously, our presenters could ask each other questions.
So, just picking up on something that Professor Walton said is is there something about Louisville specifically, Cassius Clay childhood, that prepared him for all of this? Is there something in your research that you've learned about his time in Louisville, or could you speak to that?
So I don't know or have anything specifically with that. I tend, as you may have noticed, to go to like sort of grand pronouncements and analogies. So I always have liked this idea of the Ohio River. But again, that's not a specific experience that I can point to. I don't know if, Walton, I thought you were, I really liked this idea of the Midwest, Middle West. Because I think often it tends to get told as Southern. Yeah.
Well, Louisville's one of those strange cities, right? It's I guess you could call it an Upper South, but thinking about Malcolm X, he would say that the American South begins at the Canadian border. So maybe regionalism isn't the right way, but my thinking on this has to do with what we do know very clearly about the South and surviving in the South in the middle of the 20th century, that to be enclosed within black codes or Jim Crow meant that even as children, one had to understand code switching naturally. One had to understand what it meant to cross a particular boulevard or street, a dividing line, and how to perform on those other sides. And maybe this is also apocryphal to go along with the story of, Ali tossing his medal away. The story goes that he got into boxing after his bike was stolen, and it was a white police officer who took him into the gym and started to train him. I'd like to imagine that in another circumstance, Ali would be one of the great kind of literary trickster figures in American culture, because his kind of natural dexterity with language was probably limited in the Jim Crow South because his teachers just said, well, this kid is not going to be anything. And the white world was already telling him that there were particular limits in place. And what I mean by improvisation is not simply about spontaneous creativity, but the learned practice of spontaneously responding in particular circumstances, from not only learned behavior, but learned technique to respond in the moment. So I draw that from jazz performance, and thinking about rivers and good or bad luck and southernness, if jazz performance or creative musical performance is born out of New Orleans and makes its way along the Mississippi to places like, Iowa and a little further east over to Chicago, if we're just following, say, someone like Louis Armstrong, another person who was inveterately dexterous linguistically, we can see that there's a particular kind of practice among black performers, athletic, musical, through the arts and otherwise, where improvisation is at the base of their performance. And so Louisville, as this kind of upper southern place, kind of Midwestern, kind of southern, where you have to play those multiplicities in order to negotiate that place, that's what I'm thinking of around Ali.
May
Could I
follow
also
up?
respond?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sure. I would like to say also that as someone who was raised in South Carolina and was the first class to integrate, there are narratives that are not told about Southern places and cities where there were communities that were somewhat integrated, but at the same time accepted the mores and limits of society. And I'm thinking of where, when you're in communities where you know who you are, you have the community tell you who you are. And what I mean by that is, I didn't have to go away from home and have someone tell me about my culture and who I was. So no one could tell me or demean me from knowing my purpose and my God-given talent. And so it goes with this notion that no weapon against me shall prosper. And I think you have many communities who were very strong within the South and also encouraged their children to know that you're America and you have the responsibility to go out and get what is yours regardless of what's against you. And I often think that my father, who was born in 1933, and at his funeral, there were a group of just a mixture of people. And one white lady came up to me and said, "Do you know how your dad got that little gold teeth in his mouth?" And I said, "No." She said, "We were all riding on the wagon, and they hit a bump, and he fell off and broke his tooth." And the notion of a little white girl, a little black boy, and brothers and sisters on a wagon riding down a road was possible. So I only say that because there are narratives that are not told about how blackness and being American and being strong and not being fearful are not out there. And I just want you to be aware of that as well, because those stories aren't told so easily.
So I wanted to follow up on your comments about Ali being this sort of, artisan with words as well. That's one of the kind of puzzling things about the person, how he was able to carry all of those codes, all of those abilities in himself. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this into a two-part event, because we just could not do justice to his poetic voice. So we felt we were compelled to kind of do a separate thing about it. So, when you listen to him talk, I mean, he is like a figure out of African American folklore, right? So we assume he is a genius, and he is a genius in a way, but at the same time, the historian in me constantly keeps asking, what are the foundations of that? I mean, that poetry, that oral tradition, because it is. I'm thinking of the great African American ethnographers. But Ali is just a little late for that sort of stuff. But like, what is it that survived in that pocket in Louisville? That, I mean, he adapted from a very long African American oral tradition, and he became a representative of it. It's a little anachronic as well, but he carries it very well. But I'm thinking about a time in which, during his youth, African American culture becoming more urban, more cosmopolitan, and all of this sort of stuff. Yet he kind of carries this sort of older style touch almost with him.
So let me try and frame it a couple different ways. I'll work slightly backward here and say that part of, we keep seeing iterations of Ali in the culture, not simply because of his iconic athletic status, but because of the kind of drama around his person. And here, drama, I want you to think of the kind of tragicomedy around his person, right? That on one hand, there's the downfall of the man on high, right? He's the champion. He refuses the wartime ritual practices in favor of his personal ethic, which he can defend under the rubric of religious freedom. This gets to the double cross, right? This idea that he can simultaneously use the Constitution as cloak while resisting defense of the Constitution, in quotation marks, by going to war. Lem, maybe you can back me up on this. I would say that particular stance is quintessentially African American, okay? Which is to recognize the irony of being a black person in a context where you don't have the full rights, but understanding what the full rights are in order to defend yourself, right? What that does is put your neighbor, cousin, brother, sibling, opponent in a bind also. We want to send you to war, and in fact, one might argue that drafting Ali was punishment for his announcement of his membership in the Nation of Islam, his conversion to Islam, his defense of it, and the use of Islam as defense against going to war. More double crosses all the way throughout. Part of what I think Cooper is illustrating through his talk is that act in and of itself is an American act. Ali understood that. It's also an African American act in that, moving backward historically to the folk culture, one might say that Ali's power comes from being, forgive my language, a bad nigger. He understands he's putting himself at risk. He does it nonetheless because he knows that, on one hand, physically, no one can challenge him. Secondly, he understands, and this is, I don't think that we can actually create some kind of intellectual genealogy for this, but what Ali understands in his kind of positionality is a deep philosophical truth. I have to outfox my opponent. I have to use his weaponry against him. That is part of the thing I'm pointing out is learned as a child in the midst of the Black codes. How am I going to maneuver around this? How am I going to participate in the social life that I see just out of reach, even though I know that I could get into some deep trouble by participating in it, I'm going to do it nonetheless. I would go so far as to say that Black people in the West would not have survived had they not learned those tricks of adaptability. And a way of thinking about this is to go back, say, and this might be one useful way to think about this in terms of folklore or even literature. The stories of Charles Chestnut, where he is constantly returning to either slave experience or near slave experience in order to document how African Americans who are ostensibly outside of the mainstream are finding ways to acknowledge their outsider status and use those positions in order to reap the benefits of the mainstream, so to speak. And one might go to, for instance, Michael Mann's film Ali, which I think is from 2000, starring Will Smith, to see, at least in a feature film, which is a kind of fiction, even though it's a biographical narrative, to see how Will Smith, performing as Ali, is not simply playing a character, but actually in his acting performance using elements of his own knowledge of blackness in order to perform Ali's participation in that trickster culture, right? So I think those are some tendrils that you might follow out on your own to trace that.
Could I maybe just add one thing about the memorial service? It's as if he's inventing right there while you're watching what a memorial service is. And you're so conscious of his having selected and planned every minute of this, right? Everybody is there because he chose them to be there. And some of them, take Orrin Hatch, I'm not sure they're really sure why they're there or what they can say, really, other than he was my friend, you know, and some like Orrin Hatch are really obviously very deeply uncomfortable. I mean, it's a very strange sort of celebration, and as you say, and as Cooper said, it's and this is what's on the stage. Massive auditorium in Louisville is the American flag and the Olympic flag. And what are those doing there? And what do they mean? It's again this irony, double cross. It forces you every time anyone speaks. So there's Orrin Lyons, who's actually somebody I knew, taught at the Buffalo, the State University of Buffalo, who's a faith keeper for one of the New York Iroquois tribes, and each person who speaks requires you to rethink what you might be comfortable with, and do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, it's really an extraordinary event.
For someone who, as Cooper pointed out, you know, who didn't have the ability to speak, let's say, in the second half of his life the way he did in the first half, that his final statement is so powerful.
Yes.
Like you know, exit Ali is like deep. You know, it's like deep and rich.
3.5 hours, and you're there, and this is, so you have this also your consciousness of him speaking. It's not, they are all almost puppets, or for this.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but Billy Crystal closes, right? And Billy Crystal, part of his fame was his impersonation of Ali, right? So we get that at the end, right?
Yes, yes. So what is this at that point? Yes.
A show, right? One of the great showmen walking out, like, here's the last little bit from me.
And everybody dressed to the nines. They're waiting.
You know, there's this quote that I had in my notes. I didn't want to repeat it at the beginning. But so when he was in Bloomington in 2003, obviously, you know, his daughter gave a speech in his name. But there's this wonderful quote that goes, "Rivers, ponds, lakes, and streams all have different names, but they all contain water. So too different religions all contain truth." This coming him, other people making these kinds of statements, you could think it's a little too wishy-washy, too superficial, but this coming from him in the voice of his daughter, I mean, has a particular impact. The same thing with that, you know, memorial service. I remember watching it, just transfixed to the screen, waiting to see what would be next. Someone else doing that, it would be camp, cheesy, whatever you call it. But coming from him, everything feels like a major statement at an important turning point in his life and in the American experience at large. I don't know how to pin it down, but again, another part of his genius is to be found there. That, you know, in his presence, in whatever he says or something he planned, you feel you're having a transformative experience.
And you see some of the people there, many of whom are very practiced orators, pastors, who are used to people listening to them, struggling to sort of have their voice there when it's not really their voice, it's his voice.
Yeah. The president of Turkey, frustrated, left the service early because he was not allowed to speak. Talk about another person who is used to have other people, listen to him.
I want to ask a question of the other panelists, maybe to your idea. I wonder if we might be able to talk about something like a Black American tradition of sincere irony or ironic sincerity as part of the construction of Ali.
No, I think that's right, and it gets a little bit, or at least it's tangential to what you were talking about a second ago with the folklore, and then also with the kind of significations. I mean, I was hearing in that. I was also hearing something like Albert Murray and the Briar Patch, right? Absolutely. And I think this is also wrapped up in something like drawing on Albert Murray, who was a novelist, but wrote extensively on a blues idiom, and I think ghosted both Basie and Ellington's autobiographies?
Definitely Basie's kind of had a hand in
Okay.
Music as the Muse.
Yeah, but there's something about this this ability to play on these kinds of structures, and yet to do so differently. And so this is what I love about the idea of thinking about the Briar Patch, right? Don't throw me there. Mm-hmm. And I agree also about and I've almost made it through a whole evening without mentioning Ralph Ellison, but my favorite anecdote is the Paris Review interview where he's being bombarded with these questions by people who are like, well, so are you protesting? How do you feel about this? What you said. And he's like, look, didn't you think the book was funny? And I think there's a version of this here, and this is what I often see, and what I really love and admire about Ali is how goofy he is, right? I mean, and the idea also of his sort of getting his shtick, although he got it long before this, but sort of perfecting it under the guidance of Gorgeous George, the wrestler. And I think this idea of kayfabe is also really resonant with how this works. I'll stop, but
Yeah, I think it's what I love about Ali too is his ability to use humor at the right time, to say something that's very powerful, to raise your consciousness, and to look at you when you really don't know if he's mad or not, but then that humor is there as a strategy almost. And then the other thing I think that we forget is that here is a man that people are seeing as speaking for a whole section of America in that sense. And what must that have felt like to him? Did he do it so lightly that it looked so easy? Or did he really go into his prayer time at night to really deal with it? I think it's something that we don't often think of the man and those strategies as well. But I do think that his use of thinking about the use of humor, I think it came to him naturally. It's just who he was. But he was able to do that in a way that was very impactful in getting messages across and raising the consciousness of the world.
Sonia, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Going along with the humor, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the most famous Ali poem, Me, We.
I mean, there are not enough beats in there for it to make it a haiku, so. maybe this is related to my earlier question, and thinking about also, conceptions of religious freedom or just freedom. What that poem says is that there is no individual liberty without group context, right? That in fact, our religious freedom may in fact depend on the presence of other religions, right? So that in fact, whatever our practice is needs the other as a reflection of possibility, right? And so there cannot be a conception of the individual self without others. And in the American context, e pluribus unum, to go back to one of Ellison's favorite phrases, the one in many or the many in one, we have to recognize our multiplicity individually in order to be part of the group, and we have to recognize the group in order to have anything like a sense of the individual self. But out of that context, out of that relation is in fact where freedom comes from, right? Which makes me think of, I write about boxing and prize fighting in my book by thinking of, and this is, I meant this highly, with a high sense of irony. I write about James Baldwin as a prize fighting intellectual, as someone willing to put his body at risk in order to make particular claim to what he would call his birthright, his American birthright, and that putting his body at risk within the context of an essay that is meant to, in fact, exemplify American improvisational ingenuity and forcefulness. Baldwin would say that our dehumanizing of the Negro, but let's say our dehumanizing of the other, is a dehumanization of ourselves, right? And I think that's what Ali's poem holds within it. So I'll leave it at that.
This is for anybody on the panel. I'm just curious about how you think about Ali's legacy in relation to contemporary political activism, specifically by athletes. Are there useful parallels to draw between Ali in the 60s and somebody like Colin Kaepernick? And what does it say about a nation that can valorize universally Ali at the 96 Olympics, and 25 years later have half of the nation scorn Kaepernick for taking up the kind of activism that Ali did in his prime?
Can I start? I mean, one of the things I think is really interesting, and this is some of how the double cross begins to play, is that the difference between Ali, and I say this in a kind of sarcastic way, the difference between Ali and, say, a Kaepernick is that Ali is justified because he's doing it for religious freedom, quote unquote, right? But that's the transformation, right? I mean, when Ali did this in 65, 6, 7, it was something quite different. And so I can't speak, and I don't know what the contemporary situation will become or how this all plays out, but I think it's important to remember that oftentimes one can draw the parallels, but oftentimes the way that those parallels become dismissed is precisely by this kind of exceptionalist twist. The difference is that Ali was exceptional. He's not necessarily taking exception. I'll open that up.
I think what's interesting is that Kaepernick, well, I'll put it like this. Had the 49ers won a Super Bowl, different story, okay? Kaepernick was colluded against, and thus after he was cut, did not return to the NFL. That didn't hurt him economically. Ali did not have the same field of play, and so the risk that he took was gigantic. Because they wouldn't, in some cases, let him out of the country to fight. So Kaepernick has figured out other routes because, in fact, there's a broader market possibility. And you know, I think there are positives and negatives here that what Kaepernick has done is used his iconic status to become a pitchman for workout equipment. He's attached himself to certain black media entrepreneurs to produce books and media to promote his world vision. And I'm pretty sure, correct me if I'm wrong on this, that there's a television show, say that again? Netflix show, right? Ali didn't have that possibility. And actually, part of the reason why Kaepernick can do what he's doing, and I think it's productive, right? Which is to say that he's using those resources to underwrite his particular subject political positions, right? And also protecting himself personally, economically. But I think he can do that because of Ali. That in fact, notice that many, at least in the American context, many outsider radical political positions become consumable within American market capitalism. Part of that I think has to do with the way that black athletes represent not only political possibilities, but ideas of cool. And so around a black body, there can be controversy and also productivity. So even though, you know, let's say, just another example, say someone like Serena Williams, there can be controversy around Serena Williams. She can maintain her iconic status nonetheless. That is part of, I think, the double cross, right? That we can hold both of those things simultaneously. So even if, for instance, Serena Williams gets booed at the US Open, if she were to turn around and win the tournament, people wouldn't be like, well, to hell with her, right? They'd be like, well, you know, that was a good comeback. I don't know how she did it, but that's classic Serena. So there's a great Esquire cover shot of Ali from this, the 60s period, with him arms behind his back in his boxing trunks with arrows stuck in his body. Great cover, probably sold out that issue of Esquire, but also highly symbolic that Ali's taking on a bunch of stuff in order for these other kinds of possibilities to come up. And another sign of this is that he actually, I think in our memory, we think of him as being alone in his particular fight. But the other people around him were people like Bill Russell, Jim Brown, and at the end of the 60s, then Lou Alcindor, but about to become Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, right? Probably the other great Muslim Black American athlete. So we have to see that there, in that context, Ali's creating a lot of energy and possibility alongside others, so that in this moment, we recognize that Kaepernick can lose his playing status, but still be politically productive. And this is also ironic, right? Like, to use capitalism to get to your political ends. But I think that you always use the material that's available to you.
We had another question. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for the talk. It was great, all of you guys. My question is actually kind of sort of related. So how would you see Muhammad Ali in terms of within conflict within the black community? Because a lot of older black folks did not like Muhammad Ali from the very beginning. And my grandfather was one that thought Ali was way too loud and didn't really represent black people properly. Then also, to piggyback off your point, like in '67, you had the meeting in Cleveland after he decided that he wasn't going to go into the service. A lot of black athletes then didn't think that him not going to the draft was actually kind of anti-patriotic. How much did Ali's winning, and how much did Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, that entire other voices within that movement, help propel Ali? Because if he was born 10 years earlier, maybe he would not have been able to do some of the things that he was able to do. That moment, with everything else going around him, how much did that help affect the eventual reception of Ali that didn't really happen in that moment specifically?
Yeah, let me just share my perspective there. What I love about Ali, again, is his notion to define himself. And defining himself doesn't mean only having white America tell him who he is. It also means black America's not going to tell him who he is. And that's what I love about the way he carves out who he is and what he wants to be. But also remember, there weren't very many images on television or in the media that was positive regarding how to be black and what does that mean. And so the notion with who he is and how he presented himself was really unique. I mean, you hear of the Motown gang coming on and people saying, oh, there were black images. But before that, I think you have these limited images of what it means to be black. And what I love about him is that I think the black community got used to that diversity. And as they also changed, the embracing of our diversity as a group is vast and doesn't mean it's one way. And that's the growth that happens also during the civil rights movement.
I think too, it's helpful to think about Ali emerging as in boxing at the time that he does. So the two people he fights for sort of championship, or that he's trying to get into the championship with, so Floyd Patterson and Sonny Liston. And in a way, these two figures are the two sides that he integrates. So Sonny Liston, I will defer to Walton, I'll say the bad Negro, is precisely who he was. He was mobbed up. He was, he fulfilled this kind of role. And then Floyd Patterson had converted to Catholicism. He would say things when he fought Ali, like, I'm going to bring the title back to America. But he was viewed more as an accommodationist. It's not surprising necessarily to see him, well, maybe it would be surprising to see him on the Reagan thing, but it's less surprising to see him than maybe the other two. And it seems in a way that part of, if we want to think about this as crossing or double crossing, right, it's the way that Ali splits these differences, these kinds of, be they role models or be they models of existing in boxing. Embracing on the one hand a kind of an attempt to ingratiate while at the same time deploying kind of on the turn of a dime or at the same time this other element and dimension. It's like he's triangulating himself through these models of blackness, leading up to his titles, certainly, and then leading up to his involvement with the nation, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, Ali's embodiment of both some, parts of Liston and Patterson, because, it's important in black life to be clean. And I don't mean like hygiene. I mean also about like how you present, right? And some of the cleanest brothers are in the fruit of Islam. And I think that became cover for the kind of bad elements of Ali, right? And think about boxing also as like, part of the allure is that it is exceptionally brutal, right? Two people get into a ring and try to beat the hell out of each other. And what we want more than anything else is, we want, 5 or 6 really great rounds where both fighters are trying to kill each other and then someone gets dropped with a knockout. That's not actually elegant, even though we call that sport the sweet science. But imagine, aside from like, let's say in the middle parts of the 20th century, outside of baseball, boxers are the athletes who are brutal in one context, but after the fight have to come out looking especially dapper, and also be able to, show up at the club and hang out with Frank Sinatra or whomever and have great etiquette. So you're embodying all these kind of contradictory elements. And again, I'll say like that is, I think, a kind of quintessentially African American practice of being both and in that simultaneity, representing something crucial about the group that you come from. The group may not actually like that representation, even though that is in fact the ethic of survival. We have to also remember that Ali's parents were beside themselves when their son came out as Muslim. His father loved pig feet and hard drinking. What is Ali doing is, ostensibly Ali ought to be in the practice of converting his parents to Islam. He wasn't. Does that make him a bad Muslim? Does that make him a bad son in the black context? So I think one of the things that I just lean on in my thinking and teaching, whether it's my personal identity, my professional identity, my understanding of ethnic American life, is that double consciousness is a cover for multiplicity and contradiction and irony. And if you don't accept that, then you're gonna find yourself in trouble somewhere along the line, right? So we've given this particular individual iconic status, but we don't talk about the 5 or 6 marriages, right? The gang of children that he all accepted and took care of, but it's the opposite of what we might imagine as living a devout religious life.
And also thinking about the elements of the humor or the dozens which we've talked about as humorous, but using them against Frasier or, Uncle Tom, exactly. Being a real asshole, right? And which he was fully capable of and proved himself.
But also part of the showmanship, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. And also the line where it's very difficult to tell for anyone to tell. He may not have known like what the line is here, right? What is the showmanship? What is the sort of selling, the put on, and what is, where does that line get crossed? And so it's a line that separates, but it's also a line that draws together.
And Frazier went to his death
Yeah.
really hurt by Ali, right? So.
Yeah.
So thank you to all of you. This has been really fascinating. You've all said very powerful things that have been very interesting too. But my question is for Professor Harris. So a couple of the episodes from Ali's life that you showed made me think of other Black Americans who have tried to, I guess, represent Americanness or America. When you showed the picture of Ali and Reagan, the billboard, I thought about like Sammy Davis Jr. hugging Nixon, and then when you talked about Ali going to Iraq, I thought about like Dennis Rodman going to North Korea, these types of things. I was just wondering how these other, attempts of Black Americans representing America or Americanness have informed the way you've thought about Ali as you wrote your paper.
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. Another one that James Brown also is, I think, endorsing or hanging around with Nixon for a while. And I mean, I think that for me, at least specifically for this project, it's a reminder that we inherit or are given a kind of narrative about how one ought to do things, like be Black or something along these lines politically, and there are lots of ways that people exist outside of those. And it's I think, fascinating thinking about someone like Kaepernick monetizing this. I mean, this was very much, for James Brown, very much, don't buy a TV, buy a TV station, I think he once said. And so this kind of thing. And so I think the lesson I personally take from, or what I find fascinating about this is, well, he doesn't have to be what we want him to be. And I mean, and nobody does. I mean, it'd be nice if people would be what we wanted them to be, but yeah. And so how can we think about this productively, and how does this fit into a larger picture?
Sorry, I didn't mean to belabor the evening, but I have one question. So Ali was a particular kind of Muslim, right? He's part of the Nation of Islam. Mm-hmm. And so how do we reconcile the notion of religious freedom in tension with NOI that's, very much hated, right? Because it's seen as radical and anti-American and anti-white, to a certain degree. So how do we talk about religious freedom with that type of view of the Nation of Islam?
You've published on this recently.
I mean, that's a long and complicated story, obviously. I think one thing that's interesting about the Nation of Islam, and it was certainly, in terms of the history of religious freedom, the cases that they brought for religious freedom in prisons actually redefined religious freedom in prisons, and this and interestingly, they shared legal notes with other religious minorities, including the Amish, famously, and so there was a sort of network of what you might call, unpopular religion, Seventh-day Adventists, Amish, this is the smallest group, and they kind of shared legal strategies and moved along, in the second half of the 20th century, sort of reinvented and made more space for religious diversity, and often in the changing of law, it's the unpopular people and who people are willing to sort of step out of line who actually change the law. I think that's one thing to say. and thinking again about the lineup at his memorial service, it's very hard to generalize and say, oh, these people all represent good religion or liberal religion, or they're a very unusual group of people, that the Nation of Islam and other kinds of Muslim groups. It's Billy Crystal. You know, what is this religion exactly that he's promoting here? You know, it's a new kind of religion, and that's and he is telling us not to be limited by, you know, the notion that somehow the Nation of Islam should be just defined as racist.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that by saying the story of the Nation of Islam is not one-to-one, but like there's a creation mythology there with a very specific arc to push one particular prophet-like figure into the helm. And I remember as an undergraduate here learning about the Nation of Islam, I was like, this sounds like Mormonism. Aren't their stories really similar in terms of like how, I only say that to say that the Nation of Islam is particularly American. And so whatever tension might be there is American tension. You know, it's part and parcel of who we are.
I taught that course, not the course you were in, obviously, but the Mormons, Nation of Islam, and the way I put it is it's two religious movements that were made in the USA.
I mean, as someone who studies Islamic history, I would second everything you said. I mean, looking at it from the outside, obviously from the perspective of very normative Orthodox Islam, it looks like something that really is very loosely related to Islam. But at the same time, I do see it as one of the two American religions, as you said, Mormonism and the Nation of Islam. And I think also it's important to think that if you were or are a member of the Nation of Islam, you would think that you are following true religion. You would not necessarily think that you are part of something that is seen as marginal or heretical, or for all you know, the others are heretical and marginal, and you do represent the truth. So that would be like his the way he would identify with that. One thing that, if you don't mind, I would like to go back to the question about, African Americans being asked to represent the United States in certain settings. I think there's this kind of complicated relationship in the establishment, or the white establishment, you call it, and, important African American cultural figures. I was thinking of Louis Armstrong, who was asked to do something similar during the Cold War, and actually there's this famous instance of him like reading the newspaper and reading about these racist incidents and basically refusing to go, I think, on a tour of the Soviet Union or something like that.
It was part of his
or
work
Europe.
with the jazz ambassadors.
Yeah.
And I think he was about to go on a trip when he was interviewed on a tarmac. I think you can actually find this online.
Yeah.
And
he says if Jesus were black, and if he were to come back, they would deny him his rights or something like that.
Yeah. And his challenge was explicitly to Eisenhower for not being on the steps in Little Rock, escorting the children himself into school.
Yeah.
And Armstrong had such great power culturally, he could say that and not fear. Retribution.
Yeah, exactly. So that kind of complicated relationship, which imposes almost an additional burden onto important African American cultural figures to represent the best about the United States abroad to foreign audiences, even though things may not be very well back at home. Like this ambiguity, that kind of conflict is particularly stark for me as an immigrant, who came to this country when I was 27 years old. to look at the racial relationships here in the country, and yet to have grown up with the idea that, African Americans represent the epitome of cool, the best of the United States, and this and that, while looking at it from the outside and seeing a completely different picture when you look at it from the inside. So in my mind, it's yet another burden that people like Ali were asked to carry, and he did react against it. But as Cooper wonderfully described, towards the end of his life, he also found a way of accommodating himself to that position and making something out of it.
I might say one more thing about the religious freedom and Nation of Islam. I think one of the things maybe that Ali saw is just how radical the American project is, that with respect to religion, that disestablishment truly means that there is no definition of religion in the US. There's no one in charge of what's a real religion and what's not a real religion. No one at all. The field is open. And I think that has been taken up in very interesting ways at various points, but I think that memorial service in a way demonstrates that the way in which he embraces that constitutional possibility in the broadest sense, constitution making with a small c, not the US Constitution, but constituting a new society, and doing that right, and doing that from the grave in a way, and it's a real constitution making, and that's what the radicalness of the First Amendment. And every time you talk about this outside the US, and someone will say, oh, that's very interesting. Now, what was the definition of religion in the United States? And you say, oh, no, but there isn't one. And this is true for most Americans don't understand things. There is not one. There is no definition. It is an open field. And that means that religion gets reinvented constantly in the United States. And it's a very, very interesting situation. And it puts on us the responsibility of constitution making in the broadest sense, which means both religion and politics together, inventing community.
Right. Any other questions, comments, closing remarks? All right, I think that's the end of it. Thank you so much to our panelists.
Thanks, everybody.
Our question, audience. Thank you so much.